Okay, everybody, I think we're going to get started. I'm Pat Jones, the editorial director and publisher of Golf Course Industry Magazine. It's a beautiful day here in Cleveland, Ohio. Sunny skies. Fall is in the air, and that's good news for everybody. I've seen a few people even starting to blow out their irrigation systems already on Twitter earlier today. So it's that happy time of year where we're transitioning out of one season and getting ready to start another one down south. But the one thing we're always interested in is better nutrition and better plants and healthier surfaces for golf to be played on. And that's why we're happy to be hosting a webinar today for the folks from ENP. And I'm going to let them tell you about who they are and what they do. But the one thing I know is this is an area of golf agronomics that's developed dramatically in the last 15 years. And particularly the category of amino acids has changed so much from being, when I was a younger fella in this business, the word snake oil would get used every time you bring up something like amino acid products. And that's really changed. And I think now we understand just how valuable they can be if they're used right and if they're applied the right way and if they're the correct amino acids. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'll introduce our participants here in a minute. But I would like everybody to know that you can ask questions. So if you're among our attendees today and you would like to ask a question, you can simply use your chat button, your question button, and submit a question to me, and I'll pass it along to the presenters and the participants. So that's your chance to interact. And then at the end of this presentation, we will be recording it, and we will send all of you a copy of the presentation, as well as a little bit more information that you can follow up with. So you will be getting that follow-up from us here in a few days. So with that, I'm very happy to introduce our presenters and our host here today. I'm going to start with George. George Murray, I want you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do with the ENP.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Pat. My name is George Murray, president of the ENP. I also take care of all the formulation work, any technologies we have regarding our fertilizer technologies. That's my duty as well. So wear a couple different hats there. Excited to be here and excited to be presenting about amino acids today.
Great, and tell us who you've invited, because I got to tell you, I know Curt with your team, but you've got a couple of friends of ours to participate here today too. So maybe tell us a little bit about who else is going to be on the webinar today.
Yeah, absolutely. Curt Geron's our director of sales. He's been with the company for many years now. He's been a part of this innovation and development. And Curt, you're a little closer to that scene. Would you mind introducing our two superintendents we have on board today?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, George, and thanks, Pat, and to Golf Course Industry for hosting this webinar today. So, yeah, I've been with ENP for almost 8 years now, working with our product lines, the ENP Turf line and the Foliar Pack line of products. And the two superintendents that we have with us today, one is from Euclid, Ohio, near Cleveland, and that's Brent Palinch. He's at Mayfield Sand Ridge Club. So thanks, Brent, for being with us today.
I'm glad to be here.
And thanks, Brent. And we also have Keith Wood. And Keith Wood is now at Quail Hollow Club down in Charlotte. And Keith, want to welcome you today as well.
Thanks for having me, Curt.
So George, I want to give you the chance to really tell the story about, how superintendents, I think, can do a better job of leveraging products like these and amino acid-based products in their agronomic programs. But just go ahead and get started and tell us, what you hope that people will learn today and what they should look forward to and what maybe they can plan on doing with this information when they're all done and they can move forward with their plan for this fall.
Absolutely. So, first and foremost, I always like to do an overview presentation. We're going to start out talking about environmental stressors, and this is not going to take us very long. All we're doing here is we're going to lay a foundation that talks about, hey, very often, and we have conditions that are less than optimal out there on the golf course. and we'll talk about various reasons why, and we'll set the stage for why we need certain tools like amino acids to help our turf go through these conditions. After that, we're going to talk about the amino acid education itself. We'll talk about different ways that these different amino acids are effectuating positive responses in turf and what they're doing. In each one of these different categories we have laid out under amino acid education, Curt, my co-presenter, along with the superintendents, are going to weigh in, and they're going to bring in the concrete, real-world examples of what happens when we talk about using amino acids. So I'll talk about the abstract, the scientific background, what it's doing from an abstract perspective, and then Curt, the superintendents, will come in from a concrete perspective. And after that, we'll talk about our review. We'll go over what we talked about. We'll answer questions. While we're going through this, I do want to let you guys know that if you have questions, put them in the chat bar. Also, feel free to send them out to Twitter. We can answer those live on Twitter. I've got a great team here that's going to be passing me questions while I present, so I'll do my best to kind of juggle duties here, presenting and answering questions on Twitter. But either way, just send them out. It's great to have a dialogue set up, and I think that's why we brought on these great superintendents and brought on Curt today. It's always nice to hear from multiple people during these presentations. So again, any questions, say them loud while we go through. Other than that, let's talk about environmental stress. What is stress and how do plants deal with it, right? Stress, the classic definition, is a state of strain resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. And I think we can all sit back and we can all say, yes, adverse and demanding. I mean, most of the time we go through our growing season opportunities where it's too hot, where it's too cold, where it's too dry. There's always something, right? And so for us, it's how do we deal with this stress and what's causing this stress? There's two types of stress. There's abiotic, which is non-living, and then there's biotic, which is living. And living was something we'll cover down the road. It's not going to be covered today, but typically it's your insects and your fungi, bacteria, and such like that. But abiotic stress, and everybody has this, but again, we're just laying a foundation for why we need tools like amino acids in the first place. Water, right? There's too much, there's too little. I think this year in some parts of the country we've had some pretty bad drought conditions. In other parts we've had too much. Salt. I think salt levels in the soil, depending on the type of soil that you're in, depending on the drainage, depending on the inputs you're putting in, salt levels are going to be bad. And we're going to talk about this as we go through. What happens when your salt levels get high? And I don't just mean sodium. I mean soluble salt. What happens when your turf's growing in environments that are salty, right? Temperature. I think we can all get to this. It's too hot or it's too cold. It's seldom just right. And I don't care where you are in the country, whether you're in the southern part or whether you're in the northern part, there always seems to be something about the temperature that we wish we could change. UV radiation. This is something that most people don't think about, but the ozone layer is actually thinner today than it was in the 70s. How's that for a statement of the week? So I feel, my personal opinion is, with the UV radiation that we have, we're causing more stress on turf and plants today than we were 40 years ago. Traffic, right? Foot traffic. We've got a variety of things that cause that. We've got people out there on the course. It'd be great if we could grow grass and have no one walk on it, but that kind of defeats the principle. So what do we do about that, right? And finally, mowing height. That's another thing, right? If it's less than ideal, we have to deal with it. So all these things come into, there's this either acute stress or chronic, meaning long-term, acute being short-term. This is typically the first event in the turf's demise, and we call this spiral of decline. You have an abiotic event that comes in, you stress the turf out, the stress causes the turf to create these reactive oxygen species, cell death occurs, and then you have these issues come in, like fungi, like bacteria, like insects, and you have this what we call the spiral decline. So ideally, what we're going to do is we're going to positively put in these amino acids and avoid this stress and this spiral decline that we could potentially be going down. So environmental stressors, we know it to be true: cold temps, hot temps, water, and salt, right? These are these main things that we're talking about. And this blue piece here that's in this cell, this is the vacuole. And we're going to visit this today, and I want you guys to keep this in mind as we're talking. Vacuoles can occupy up to 30% and up to 90% of your cell volume. So when you're talking about turbidity, where you're talking about cells staying alive, it's all about keeping water in that vacuole, okay? And so what happens is we're constantly fighting against outside salt that's causing that water to be pulled out of that vacuole and causing your cells to shrink and die. So a lot of when we talk about stress, it's talking about putting in certain metabolites that are going to keep that water in that vacuole. And at the end of the day, it can be that simple. So what are we going to do about it? Amino acids. Today we're talking about amino acids, and guys, this is not supposed to be, a metabolic plant physiology class that would take normally a semester or two in grad school. We're going to be hitting the high notes. We're going to be doing some oversimplification. It is going to get pretty sciencey at times, but again, we're always going to be able to bring it back down and tie it into concrete, real-world example. Okay. So what do they really do? And I think for me, when I started this journey and came into amino acids, I think there was always a description about amino acids, and it went along the lines of amino acids produce proteins, and they do other great things in the plant, but it was always nebulous. It was never. And for me, when you look at what we're seeing better color with amino acids, we're seeing better, insecticide uptake, we're seeing better grow-in and better survival rates when we're using these amino acids, and why? So we went down this research path and started answering all these questions. There were some facts that came out of the woodwork. And number one is some amino acids are more important than others. When we started years and years and years ago of doing amino acid work, we were using a package of amino acids that had 18 amino acids, and it was a great story. And we all figure in this country more is better. But in this case here, it's not necessarily about the total different number of amino acids, but the total concentration. So applying a specific concentration is important because we're trying to effectuate change, or we're going to cover that in the next slide, but keep that in mind. And finally, amino acids can be used in different ways. They can be used foliarly. They can be used in the soil. There's different things that amino acids do, and you can use them as physiological tools of sorts. So it's important to keep this in mind as we're talking about amino acids today. There are these pools of amino acids, okay, and so they hang out. Amino acids are in the cytoplasm, which is in the general area of your cell. They're in the mitochondria, which takes care of different types of things and energy production for the plant, and they're in the chloroplast, okay. And what happens is when we put these amino acids in the plant, we want these pools to fill up, because when these pools start to fill up of each individual amino acid, the plant goes into this response that says it wants to metabolize these amino acids, and that's really what we're getting at the end of the day. The amino acids themselves are great, but we're trying to get to their metabolites. We're trying to get the plant to turn them into a downstream product, to send them into the vacuole, to create chlorophyll, to form an organic form of nitrogen. This is what we're trying to do. And so applying a concentration of a single amino acid is very important to do that. So in the old days when we were going out with 18 different amino acids, and we were applying these 18 different amino acids, but they were all at a low concentration, maybe we were effectuating these changes in the pools to a certain extent, and maybe we weren't. But now we're concentrating on a couple different amino acids, and today we're going to talk about 4 different ones, and applying those in higher concentrations, we're seeing these metabolic changes take place. And that's the exciting part. And later in the presentation, we'll talk about some of the research that we've done and how we know we're effectuating these changes. So this is a big shift, guys. This is a big shift for us, and I think this is a big shift potentially for the industry. And so today we're going to be talking about 4 amino acids. We're going to take the 18 and we're going to boil them down to 4. So again, any questions you guys have as we go along, feel free to shout them out.
Yeah, guys, just pass those along via the chat function. And if you're like me, you're sitting here trying to process a lot of science at once here. So feel free to jump in with any questions if you want to clarify anything.
And again, we're just getting started, and these are all going to be repeated here as we go through these 5 different categories. The first one is going to be increasing nitrogen assimilation. What are our goals with these amino acids? And we're going to break it down into 5 categories today. Increasing nitrogen assimilation, we're going to talk about what that means. Increasing chlorophyll production. Increasing carbon assimilation. What does that mean for the plant, right? Amino acid production. So amino acids can turn into other amino acids. And what does that mean, and how does this change what we used to do? And finally, increasing anti-stress compounds. So this is the roadmap. This is what we're going to be talking about today. This is the exciting opportunity for you guys sitting out there. How can you get your turf to go through its processes more efficiently? How can you get it to fix nitrogen and use nitrogen more efficiently? How can you get it to assimilate carbon and build roots and build other structures more efficiently, right? How can you get it to go through salty and stressful conditions? And these are hopefully what the answers that we're going to be bringing to the table today. So increase in nitrogen assimilation, okay? What does this mean for the turf, okay? And guys, this is really, really complex. And the only reason I have this stuff down on the slide is so you can see that I'm not making it up, okay? But big point here, big picture is whether you apply nitrate, whether you apply ammonium, which is NH4, or whether you apply urea, which eventually turns into ammonium, it all turns into ammonia in the chloroplast, okay? And here's the kicker. Our nitrogen that we feed the plant is useless until we fix it into an organic compound, meaning we add a carbon to it, okay? And these ammonia levels are actually toxic to the cell. So the goal of the plant is when it takes up the nitrogen, it wants to turn it into an organic compound as fast as possible, okay? And what allows it to do that is glutamic acid. That is your bottleneck. If you do not, your plant was not able to produce glutamic acid, or we did not have glutamic acid at sufficient levels in the chloroplast, you would not be able to use the nitrogen that you're giving your plant. And furthermore, it would be toxic. Okay, and the plant has ways where it can cycle the glutamic acid to the cytoplasm and back into the chloroplast as it needs it. So there's always these ways, and again, I just want to put this down on paper to demonstrate it. There's always these ways and enzymes the plant's able to use and produce to allow the plant to get the amino acid where it needs to be, but it has to be there. What's our takeaways? So ammonia is the end source available to the plants regardless of what input you use, whether it's nitrate, ammonium, whether it's urea, it all turns into ammonia in the chloroplast. Ammonia is toxic, and we have to put a carbon to it as soon as possible, and glutamic acid is necessary for this conversion. That's really neat. So again, that's science, that's abstract. Let's bring Curt in now to talk with some of the superintendents about what this has meant for them.
Thanks, George. Yeah, this is a really interesting concept, I think. As a former golf course superintendent, growing turf grass around Columbus, Ohio, for many years, and I think a lot of guys who maintain cool season turf have been through this type of scenario before. Coming out of spring, where the temperatures warm up, you get some favorable weather, and the turf really starts to grow, and you get great color, and things are going gangbusters. And then all of a sudden, maybe it's late April, maybe it's 1st of May, you go through a stretch of really cold, cloudy, rainy weather, and the turf kind of goes in a bit of a tailspin. It starts getting very chlorotic and just weak looking. And I always attributed that, that chlorotic, yellow appearance to, all right, well, it's a lot of cloudy weather here. The plant's not building chlorophyll and keeping up with the growth. But, bringing to light the fact that a low supply of glutamic acid could result in keeping that plant from converting inorganic nitrogen into a carbon form, and even more so, a buildup of that ammonium nitrogen in the plant being toxic to the plant. You could see where, with a downturn in weather and a cool, cloudy weather, where the plant may not be able to produce glutamic acid like it should, and you have this buildup of ammonium nitrogen, especially when you have a high intake of nitrogen early on in that season with the previous good weather. And so I think that's interesting, and that downturn in turf could be coming from that ammonium toxicity as well. So not that it's a cataclysmic event. It's probably not going to cause a great loss of turf, but what we're trying to do here is increase growth efficiency and physiological efficiency in the plant. And anytime we can avoid these peaks and valleys of growth, that's going to impact the plant in terms of having down the road having better carbohydrate reserves in general. So that's my thoughts there. And now I'd like to bring on Brent from Mayfield, Sand Ridge, to talk a little bit about the first time that you used our foliar pack / ENP products. And I believe it was a similar type of situation is what I described. So Brent, if you can chime in.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Curt. Yeah, we first started using foliar pack in the spring of 2012. It was one of those years we actually got off to one of our quickest starts. We typically aerify mid-April, but this year particular in 2012, we were able to aerify in March. And I mean, it was one of the warmest Marches in history for Cleveland, Ohio. And aerified, and everything was great. About a week later, we got 4 inches of snow. 5 weeks later, we still had snow flurries and stuff. And basically what we were seeing was, I mean, what Curt was describing. It was chlorotic. We weren't getting growth. And it didn't matter what I put down, I was not seeing a response. So just happened to have an appointment with the Advanced Turf Solutions rep that day, and we're looking at things, and he's like, would you be interested in trying our product line? And I said, well, I'm going out tomorrow with a spray. If you can have it here by 7 tomorrow, I'll use it. So he left right then and went and grabbed the product, and we used it. And that's sort of how we got started. It was one of those cold springs, and we have L93 creeping bentgrass, and we're about 10 miles south of Lake Erie. So we stayed cold, for a while. I mean, it's June, we'll still have frost up this way. So I've seen a big improvement with the turf strength and color in the spring since we started using aminos.
Brent, do you have any recommendations on timing or sort of the practical aspects of when you're going to look to get it down and to get that result?
Yeah, sure. I think when we're trying to do this, again, the weather up here by Lake Erie, as you would know, Pat, is pretty unpredictable. And so we're trying. We don't do a whole lot in April. I mean, we may feed a little bit of just urea and potassium and calcium, and maybe an application here or there if it looks like we're going to have a stretch of 4 or 5 days in a row. Then maybe we'll go out with a foliar spray with some aminos, sort of towards the end of April. So soil temperatures get up 55 or so. But really, it gets into the beginning of May for us. I mean, we're in our own little microclimate, even compared to the west side of Cleveland. So I mean, I think that between even Akron, Chardon, Westlake, there's all micro climates. But I think sort of end of April, beginning of May for us up here.
Cool. Thanks.
So, George, I think your next step here is to talk about some other ways that the amino acids are going to impact color, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about nitrogen assimilation and how we can get these amino acids, and specifically glutamic acid, how we can leverage that to use our nitrogen more efficiently. And I think Curt has some good ideas and some good theories about what we're seeing in the spring, especially as the plant is moving a little bit slower. How can we make this nitrogen be used more efficiently? But color, I mean, we're always looking at color. It's one of the ways that we judge turf health is look at how green it is. So chlorophyll is a big part of that. So I wanted to take everyone through this process of how chlorophyll is built. And again, nobody should memorize this. I don't memorize this. I just put it down on a PowerPoint slide to prove that I'm not making it up. But glutamic acid is actually the starting material for chlorophyll. This is where your carbon comes from in your chlorophyll pigment. As you've noticed here, you need iron and you need magnesium to be able to make chlorophyll. But iron is not actually a part of the chlorophyll pigment itself. Magnesium is, but iron is not. So what happens is you need iron, you need magnesium, but you need glutamic acid, and eventually you make chlorophyll. Okay? If you don't have glutamic acid, you can't make chlorophyll. You can dump as much iron as you want, you can dump as much nitrogen as you want, but again, you're not going to be able to make chlorophyll without glutamic acid, which is powerful. So when we're going through our trials in the beginning and we're learning, we're doing these replicated studies, and we're seeing a better green, I mean, it jumps out at you, a deeper green, just by using glutamic acid. and you say to yourself, why is that? This is why. So why don't you jump back in, Curt, and get Keith on the line here to talk about what the amino acids have done, for him and his color down his course.
Yeah, right. And, first of all, we're talking about improving plant efficiencies here by increasing protein production through nitrogen assimilation. We're not only are we impacting color here with better chlorophyll synthesis, but we're impacting photosynthetic efficiency. So it's interesting, and I want to bring Keith on from Quail Hollow to talk about a couple of his experiences and some advantages that Keith, that you've gained from the use of our Grow 40 product, which is our concentrated amino acid supplement that you used prior to the Wells Fargo PGA Tour event this year. Can you weigh in?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody, and we've been very impressed with the amino acids in our program, and the fact that I feel like that we don't have to put out as much nitrogen to get the color response. Goes along with what George said there, and I feel like we have a much healthier plant, better capable of handling stress of tournaments where we turn off the water and we expect to keep the color. We saw that firsthand this past year on our ryegrass. Even more so impressed that the Bermuda grass base that we're actually playing golf of during the Wells Fargo Championship, the ryegrass just provides the color, but the Bermuda grass base underneath actually was in very, very good health, where we saw divots starting to recover through from rhizome and stolon growth, and where we were able to stop putting out sand and seed to fill divots before the tournament. And all this comes with less than ideal soil temperatures, where you would think that the Bermuda grass shouldn't start growing, and maybe the ryegrass is just not going to flourish as well without a lot of nitrogen. And we saw both of those things happen with 2 halves of the amino acid package.
Yeah, and Keith, I think you mentioned to me prior a couple weeks ago that you really witnessed a longer color and health residual when you packaged the Grow 40 in with a phosphite and some other materials that you were spraying. Is that correct? Absolutely.
Love mixing the amino acids with a phosphite. Everything I've read about phosphites, is improved movement throughout the plant, and just it seems logical to me to mix an amino acid and the Grow 40 in there with it, and just have it get everywhere it needs to get in the plant. And even more so after hearing George speak at another class one time, that the amino acids may help things move around in the plant. So anything that, in my mind, anything I can mix with an amino acid where I want it to move throughout the plant in different locations, I try to use the GrowPlex 40 in that situation.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Nice observations. And I just want to talk a little bit about how our these targeted aminos that we're using, they are increasing plant efficiencies and critical functions in the plant. And when we do that, we might be able to limit some nitrogen inputs. And I'm not talking about dramatically reducing nitrogen applications, but just due to some of these material benefits that we get from our targeted aminos, they could allow us to limit nitrogen and control growth. And Brent, can you weigh in some of your thoughts on this, because I know you've seen some differences between our products and programs versus some of the things that you were doing in the past.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, up here in Cleveland, we're blessed with some pretty good weather. I mean, nothing like what Keith deals with down in Charlotte, that's for sure. So we're average, about 10 days above 90. And but we had 3 consecutive years, 2010, 11, and 12, that were all, really pretty tough years. And going back to 10 and 11, I was using a competitor's product, and it was just really difficult to control my growth, and I just was cutting nitrogen completely out. The issue I was having, though, was I would see thinning. I mean, just wherever the cup was that day, the turf was just so succulent. So, I mean, we're getting a lot of topical growth, but the plant was not hardened off. It could not take stress. If we tried to put a roller out there, it just would want to thin out also. So we were relying more on multiple cuttings. I mean, we were cutting at least twice every day, but I mean, probably 3 times a day, probably 3 to 4 times a week. So I mean, we're putting a lot of man hours into mowing. Going into 2012, when we switched to the foliar pack line, we basically took our program that we had with a competitor and tried to mimic, the nutrient levels per week for our applications. Well, instantly we saw a reduced clipping yield. It was amazing. I mean, we went from, like I said, we were probably mowing 16, 17 times a week. We went all the way down to mowing 8 times a week. I just threw a double cut in because I was used to doing it in the past, so I figured I had to double cut 1 day a week. Our green speeds, increased. Turf health was, remarkable. Rooting, we're on bent grass, so obviously we're going to have a little bit better rooting than a POA course, but I mean, our rooting went from probably 3 to 4 inches prior years to probably 6 inches that first year. So traffic was much better, just overall consistency, plant health. That's what we really noticed that first year, and it has continued for each of the last 5 seasons, including this year. We had another pretty difficult season this year, and it's still just the same. It works great with reduced clippings.
Hey, Brent, I think we have a question from the audience that's kind of relevant to that, and Curt, you obviously can jump in here too. How about impact on PGR uptake? Did you see any change in the way your PGR applications were working as they interacted with the amino acids?
Yeah, and I know I'm going to touch on this later with my aerification time, but I think probably now is a good time. We use a plant growth regulator called Trimit, and it's a soil absorbed regulator. So we have noticed a very increased amount of plant growth regulation from, I think, the deeper rooting. All of a sudden, I think it has more of an opportunity to stay in the plant a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago when we were aerifying, the first year I used the product, we aerified and it healed in instantly. The second year, I think our rooting was even that much better. The mass was just so great. I think the Trimit stayed in the plant longer, and we actually healed in a little bit slower that year, even though the plant was. But I think we were just too regulated, and now we have to know how to sort of get off the regulation like 2 weeks prior to it, and then get right back onto it. So it's so yeah, definitely I think it's increased regulation.
And yeah, if I can jump in, we're going to talk about foliar uptakes and what that means for PGRs later on as well, and then how we think that works from a foliar perspective. Okay. So that's coming.
Very good.
Very good, George.
Curt, are we good here?
Yeah, I think we're good here. Obviously, we've got more to say about that later on, because we do see some very nice interaction with growth regulators, but we'll hit upon that later.
So all we're hearing thus far is that, look, we're trying to help the plant go through its processes more efficiently. So we're helping it fix nitrogen more efficiently. We're helping them build chlorophyll more efficiently. And so all of a sudden the idea of, well, we've got to dump nitrogen into the plant as much as we can, and we've got to dump as much iron as we can in the plant, it's all fine and good, but if you don't have these amino acids in there, and we've talked about glutamic acid thus far to help you through these processes, that's the bottleneck. And so What we're finding out is maybe by applying these amino acids in certain concentrations at certain times, we're able to do more with less and have better quality turf at the end of the day. So shifting gears, we're going to talk about, we're going to go in and talk about carbon assimilation now, okay? So carbon assimilation, this is a wonderful piece here. I think people are going to print this out and probably put it up on their wall. But where I'm going with this is that there are two types of turf that we're working with, which is C3 and C4 turf, okay? And C4 is usually your warm season turf, okay? And really we're going to talk about, there's differences between C3 and C4. So this is, we're going to start talking about C4, and C4 plants have evolved. They've developed these organelles and structures that involve mesophyll and then the bundle sheath cells. And the whole point of this is that they're trying to concentrate the carbon in the plant to maximize photosynthetic efficiency. Okay, and we're going to talk in the next slide of what's happening there when those pores open and you're bringing in CO2, but you're also bringing in oxygen, right? We've got CO2 in the air, we've got oxygen in the air, but all we really want is the CO2. We need to fix that carbon. And so what happens here is that the aspartic acid is actually your carrier, your carbon carrier, that allows you to take the carbon that the plant's taken up and put it in bundle sheath cells so it can be used to make photosynthesis. Okay? So I think there's people out there right now, and there's competitors of ours that will say, hey, we've got this carbon product, and it might be humic acid based, it might be whatever based, okay? And they're going to say, hey, this carbon's going to be great for the plant plant's going to be able to take it and fix nitrogen and all this, and fix the photosynthase and do all this stuff, and that's not true. It's got to be in a specific form, and in this case, it's aspartic acid to go in a bundle sheath cell to be fixed. So with aspartic acid, we have that opportunity in warm season turf, and then on the back end, to take it back out, you need alanine. Okay, so that's a discussion for another day. Now, for our C3 turf, we have this thing called photorespiration. Okay, the C3 turf did not evolve. Is still kind of stumbling through. They're opening up their smaller pores and they're taking what they get. And so what happens is the plant also takes up oxygen, okay? Now that oxygen is not able to be used for photosynthesis, obviously, okay? So up to 25% of your photosynthetic process could be wasted in C3 plants, okay? So what do we do here and what are the options? Glycine is actually able to donate a carbon to turn O2 into CO2, basically. And it can go through the peroxisome or it can go through the cytosol and into the chloroplast, but at the end of the day, the take-home message here is that glycine can donate a carbon and take that wasted O2 and turn it into CO2. Okay, so when we're getting out there and we're doing trials with glycine and we're seeing just better overall health, you know, this is one reason why we're seeing this, okay? So this is, again, really deep science, but if we just make it simple on ourselves, you need aspartic acid to be able to fix that carbon in your C4 plant, and you need glycine to be able to help your plants out when it's taking up oxygen. So Curt, why don't you talk about what this means? And you know, again, that's very sciencey, very abstract. What does this actually mean, though? What does this do to the turf at the end of the day when we're able to increase our carbon assimilation efficiency?
Yeah, so let's talk about bringing together all these processes that you talked about a little bit, George. I mean, increasing photosynthetic activity through the use of glutamic acid, increasing nitrogen assimilation, which results in better protein production, and now we're talking about increasing carbon assimilation, which leads directly to building more energy through photosynthesis. So it's pretty exciting stuff because when we help the plant build more and more energy and more carbohydrates, it can divert some of that energy to building roots. And these pictures here help me tell a story that occurred this year. On the left, you see a sod strip, and that sod was placed down in March on a green here in central Ohio. And it was placed there to repair a hydraulic leak. I came back and visited the superintendent in late July. It was almost August 1st. The picture on the right where we stuck a probe in the ground there in that sod and pulled out this core, and now you're looking at 7, 8 inches of roots. And the superintendent looked at me and he said, "Hey, you know, this is sod. I would expect this from seeded turf, but this is sod. I need to talk to George. I mean, are you telling me that your amino acid program is doing this much for the plant where it's helping build energy, so it's pushing roots like this. Like, well, hey, this is your green. This is not a picture from 100 miles away there, bud. So pretty cool stuff. And again, it's this overall process devoted to improving overall plant energy. So I want to shift gears a little bit, because this is a cool season turf, and bring Keith back into the discussion. And Keith, if you can talk a little bit about how you've used amino acids to improve plant health on warm season turf, especially in the shoulder parts of the year.
Yeah, Curt. So here at Quail, we have champion greens, and we've had many verdigreens. Both ultra dwarf Bermuda grasses are very dependent on sunshine, and clear skies and sunny days in order to thrive and to just be in their happy spot. So typically in the spring and fall in the Carolinas, we get stuck in our what I call the shoulder months. We get stuck with some cloudy weather, some adverse conditions, and a lot of times the ultra dwarf Bermuda grass greens they want to thin out a little bit on you during that time, much like the bent grass gets in their stress situation during the summer. We have two stresses being spring and fall, and what I've seen is that, and just listen to what George is saying, it makes sense, but previously not knowing the science behind it, what we've seen is when we spray amino acid products on the greens, we tend to get a healthier, more upright, tight growth habit. We're able to decrease the amount of water that we're putting on the greens, better drought stress, especially in the fall. Now, one of the things that happens in the fall in the Carolinas is we go from this very hot, humid, kind of tropical moisture environment in August, and sometime around Labor Day, the fall air blows in here and we get cool, dry air. So not only is the plant stressed from not having the heat and humidity, but when that humidity drops and it gets really dry air, it's like the soil loses all the moisture, and it's just a little bit of a shock to the plant. So in using the GrowPlex 40, we've seen deeper rooting, and where we're not having to water as much in the fall to keep the plant happy. And then again, going back to the cloudy intervals, it seems like using the amino acid-based products really helps with the plant health and the density, and it helps us struggle through those cloudy days.
Thanks, Keith. Those are observations that we hear from many folks that using the product. So appreciate your insight there. George, back to you.
Yeah.
For
Yeah, absolutely. That was great stuff, Keith. And again, when you pair that up with the science behind it, it all kind of begins to make sense. One thing that we had when we switched, philosophies here, and we used to do 18 different amino acids, we had questions about, well, are we sure that, a couple of different amino acids are better than applying all 18? And so, at the end of the day, what we're doing here and where the opportunities are is that these amino acids that we're applying, and in the case of aspartic acid and glutamic acid, we call them upstream amino acids because what happens is through different aminotransferase enzymes, they can turn into other, quote, downstream amino acids. And so instead of applying 18 amino acids and just hoping for the best and saying, hey, we know you need histidine and lysine and methionine and all the other great amino acids out there, now we're letting the turf decide, okay? So the turf can take glutamic acid and it can turn it into 3 different amino acids in one step. And from those, it can turn into, glutamine can turn into histidine, and ornithine turns into eventually arginine. So that's great. Histidine is important for zinc and nickel accumulation in plants. That's wonderful, okay? But instead of just applying histidine, we're applying a high amount of glutamic acid, and we're letting the plant decide. The plant's going to send signals within itself to say, hey, you know what? I need to work on my zinc and nickel accumulation. I'm going to transfer some of this glutamine and turn it into histidine, right? Or arginine, right? It's important nitrogen storage and transport. If the plant and turf needs to store nitrogen, it'll turn it into arginine. Great. Proline, we're going to talk about proline a lot here in a little bit. We talk about anti-stress, but it's an osmolyzing the vacuole. meaning that it's loaded into the vacuoles, and it helps the water stay in the vacuoles, and the vacuole will maintain its shape, which again, turf's composed of 80% water. That's really important stuff. But again, we're allowing the plant to kind of decide this and what it's doing. Same for aspartic acid. In one step, it can turn into asparagine, methionine, lysine, and threonine, and then some of these amino acids can turn into others. So again, it indicates nitrogen status in the plant with glutamine. There's a balance there. Great, okay? But we're not going to apply it, and we're going to let the turf decide if it needs it. Methionine, building up signal transduction in plants. It helps the plant communicate with each other. It's kind of an interstate within the plant. Methionine plays a role in that. Lysine can turn into glutamic acid. It also can turn into dehydrin proteins, which helps the plant go through these stressful times, especially when you talk about water concerns. And threonine, it helps regulate the levels of pyruvate. It's involved in the energy production in the plant. All great things. In the past, we would have just sprayed all these amino acids out in various concentrations, and it was a great story. But now we've got the science to back it up, and so we're sitting there, and you're probably asking yourself, and if you haven't done it yet, you might later. How do we know, George? How do we know that glutamic acid and aspartic acid turns into these different amino acids, or turns into chlorophyll, or turns into any of the structures that we've talked about? And this is research we're going to continue to do in 2017 that we've already done. We're taking isotopes of these amino acids. Okay, so we're adding an extra proton to your nitrogen or an extra proton to your carbon. The carbon has 12 protons, or nitrogen has 14 protons, and what this allows us to do is to be able to track this. And when we spray these isotopes amino acids on the foliage of the turf in the greenhouse, and then we harvest that turf, we're able to take it to the metabolomics facility, and we're able to actually track where did that carbon-13 or nitrogen-15 amino acid turn into. Did it turn into glutamic? Did it turn into chlorophyll? Did it go into proline? Did it do other sorts of things? And we can track it down to that level. And that's exciting. For us, we're able to check the uptake rate for these different amino acids in optimal growing conditions, but we're also able to see the metabolic state when there's different environmental conditions. So when the conditions are optimal, the plant says, hey, you know what, I'm doing good. I'm just going to make more chlorophyll, or I'm going to bank this into proline, or I'm going to turn this into lysine, right? In drought stress, the plant may say, you know what, I'm going to take this glutamic acid, I'm going to turn it into as much proline as I can, and as much gamma-amino butyric acid as I can. I'm going to load it up. So there's different signals that happens, and the plant can use this amino acid gift, which is basically what it is, in different ways. So I just wanted to make you guys aware of it, say, hey, we're doing this, we've done it, we've got early data in our hands now, and we're going to continue this in a big way. And this is a unique way to look at it. I think in the past, when you look at what other people have done, they go to a university and they go to the turf guy and they say, hey, Dr. So-and-so, why don't you spray this out in replicated trials, and let's see if it changes color. Let's see how it survives the summer. Let's see all this stuff. And don't get me wrong, we're doing that. But to me, the question is why? Why is this happening? And to do that, you've got to break it down into metabolic physiology. And that's the exciting research that we're doing and we're going to continue to do. So to finish this up, the last category here is stress reduction. And this is, we've talked about indirect benefits, nitrogen assimilation, carbon assimilation, building more chlorophyll, right? Having the opportunity to change into different amino acids. But what about direct benefits? Are we directly effectuating this positive change in turf and allowing it to go through these stressful conditions? And I'll tell you where we started. We started in a greenhouse, and we were doing replicated trials with different amino acids. And we would spray a couple sprays of amino acids, and then we started irrigating with salt water, literally the same salt concentration as the ocean. And the survival rate of these different plots, it was dramatic. How much better the turf survives when you fed it, say, glutamic acid versus a package of 18 different amino acids at the same total concentration. So, as glutamic acid, let's use that as an example, it can turn into something called gamma-amino butyric acid, which is a mouthful, but it's an osmolyte. Up to 50% of it can be found in the vacuole. It can be transferred from cell to cell, depending on where it needs to go. And what does this mean? It's helping the vacuole keep that water, okay? Everything that we're really concerned about when you talk about stress is maintaining the water in the cell. And to understand that, you have to understand osmosis, which at the end of the day, osmosis is water wants to flow from a concentration of low salt to a concentration of high salt. We're going to cover this in the next couple slides, but basically, if your salt concentration becomes higher, if you have drought conditions, you've been fertilizing, or you just have a lot of salt left in your soil, for instance, any type of salt, calcium, sodium, whatever you have, water will want to leave the cell of your plant and go into the water table there in the soil. And we have to prevent that from happening, and that's where we have these osmolytes, okay? So GABA is one of those osmolytes, okay? Glycine is another one. It turns into choline. Choline is another osmolyte. It's loaded up in the vacuoles as well as the chloroplast, okay? Choline is also converted to glycine betaine, and this is, again, a lot of science, but at the end of the day, your takeaway message here is that glycine will also load up into the vacuole as a metabolite, and it will also load up in the chloroplast, which will, at the end of the day, prolong the life of your chloroplast, okay? Especially in your high salt, low temperature environment, maintaining functioning chloroplast is really important, okay? Plants cycle through chloroplast continuously anyway. So if we can take the life cycle, and this is all theoretical, let's just say we take the life cycle of a chloroplast from 1 day and turn it into a 1 day and a half, right? And so now what you have is the plant, instead of having to replace that chloroplast as frequently, it can divert its energy doing other things. Okay, proline, we talked about that. How does proline work, okay? Proline is actually the only cyclic amino acid, meaning that's a circle, all right? And think of it in this analogy. If you have a sack and you fill it up with bricks, and then you fill it up with water, and if you pour that water out, your sack begins to shrink. It can only shrink as much as those bricks, the physical structure of those bricks, allow it to do. And that's how proline works. As a vacuole starts to come under pressure because your salt levels are building outside of your soil and your water starts to leave, the proline that's in there will maintain that shape and act as that brick inside your vacuole and allow it to only shrink to a certain point. So at the end of the day, we saw this picture earlier, this blue thing is our vacuole there, okay? You know, we're talking about how do we keep that water in that vacuole, right? With osmolyte, okay? And you guys have been using an osmolyte since probably the day you started working on a golf course. And the first foremost, potassium, right? That's a huge osmolyte. Potassium is the only nutrient, okay, that does not actually become an organic form in the plant. It stays K+ and it's loaded up in the vacuole, okay? Another osmolyte is GABA. We talked about that from glutamic acid. Glycine betaine. Proline. There's also proline betaine. So proline can metabolize into proline betaine. Choline, okay, that comes from glycine and glutamic acid itself. So when we're using these amino acids, we're loading the plant up with these osmolytes, we're increasing the good salts, right? Because water is going to evaporate, right? And our salt concentration is going to increase outside of the cell. And so at the end of the day, we're just fighting against whose salt concentration can be higher, inside the vacuole or outside. And so for you guys that are kind of struggling with this concept, you know, one easy way I've been able to kind of describe this is that you're looking at an arms race. Think of Cold War. We've got to build our good salts inside our vacuole to keep that water and that concentration there higher than our outside salt concentration, right? And when you do that, and you do that with amino acids, you can even take the extreme where you're irrigating with salt water, and your turf is still able to function and survive because that water is staying in that vacuole. Your cells are not shrinking and not dying. So at the end of the day, you can think of it like this. This is like the Russians from Rocky IV, and this is like Sylvester Stallone. It's oversimplified, but people seem to grasp that concept.
Which one's Clever Lang? That's what I want to know. I'm sorry.
That's in the next presentation when we talk about amino acids.
Okay, fair enough. We'll come back to Clever.
Tune in next week for your next, Rocky analogy. Okay.
Well done.
You say here people laughing, but everyone's muted, so I'm assuming people are laughing here. So.
We hope so. Hey, we do have a couple of good questions here. If this is a good time to pop those in. A couple of people have asked, and I throw this out to both Keith and Brent, how does the foliar pack program, how does the EMP fit now in your program overall? Have you eliminated granulars? Have you reduced them? So maybe Brent, maybe you could start, because I think we have a lot of cool season guys on here. How has it affected your overall fertility program?
Yeah, sure. Good question. Yeah, going back to when we first started, as we were having all that succulent growth prior, we basically eliminated all other nitrogen granular sources. So we basically just went with the foliar pack line for for our nitrogen sources as well as all other micronutrients. We still did feed calcium, potassium through granular applications. About the last couple years, we have gone back in with a granular. We're using an organic-based product. We do that at aerification time in spring and fall. We'll get about a pound of nitrogen out there, supplemented with the about another pound of nitrogen with the foliar feeding. So we're about 2 pounds of nitrogen, and basically we're looking for how is the turf handling the stress is where we feel that we will need to add a little bit of nitrogen. And we started to see a little bit of our calcium numbers started to go down, and we thought maybe the microbes were starting to feed a little bit more, and so we felt that we needed to put a carbon source back out there.
Okay. How about you, Keith?
Different grass, different requirements. Obviously, we do lean on granulars for our base nutrients, and we do use the GrowPlex 40 quite a bit to manage stress. So we have more of a traditional fertility regimen, but we do supplement quite frequently with amino acids.
Cool.
Yeah.
There was yeah, go ahead.
Pat, yeah, I'd just like to weigh in on a couple of things real quick. And obviously, Keith has a different situation than our cool season guys for sure, and tend to use more nitrogen down in the southern regions with warm season turf. But generally speaking, especially on cool season turf, I'd say that we don't see very many folks that rely totally on liquid and foliar nitrogen sources, and it's usually not something that we recommend, honestly. And but as mentioned before, there's a lot of great impacts here that allow us to dial in nitrogen and reduce it to a certain extent. The other thing I want to mention here is Brent's using the foliar pack line of products. We have our ENP turf line of products, and they're very similar. There's some subtle differences between the two brands, but by and large, we're talking about the same technology used, same amino acid technology, and those things. So.
Okay. We had a good question from our friend Kevin Smith, who's over in Tokyo these days, and but started in the a lot of it.
Up at this hour.
Well, yeah, I know it's a little late for him, but you know he's one of those guys who can't stop learning. But he asked, and I'll just read it out. Said, I recently moved to a part of the world that receives 800 fewer hours of PAR sunlight annually compared to Atlanta, Georgia. Further, we receive measurable rainfall of 40 of the first 120 days I was here. Pretty wet. Obviously, disease potential is high. I'm growing both C3 and C4 grasses at putting green height. He has double greens, as do some courses in Japan. I'm curious about what potential disease suppression benefits I might expect, especially as a tank mix partner with phosphates. So bottom line is, if he's mixing your product base with phosphates, what kind of suppression effect might you see?
Curt, do you want to weigh in, or do you want me to answer that?
Well, yeah, and Keith hinted on this a little earlier as he uses tank mixes with this phosphate program, and a lot of folks do. And in my opinion, what we do see some beneficial effects here, and some additive effects, and could be from just further translocation of the product, could be from increasing the uptake, opening the plant up, which George is going to talk about here in a few minutes. Just similar types of benefits that we would see from better efficacy of growth regulators, whether it be whether it be sometimes paclobutrazol or whether it be Primo and trinexapac ethyl. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be lying too, Pat, if I didn't tell you that we're knee deep in this research right now, especially with phosphates and amino acids. It's something that the world, and certainly not just the U.S., but I've read some research trials out of Brazil, over there in Europe, and the pairing with amino acids and phosphates. And all I gotta say is stay tuned. We've got some really interesting stuff that we're working on in that category.
Okay. Hey guys, let me say one thing, just to let Kevin know that we sprayed today our typical fall preventative application for leaf spot and foliar pythium on Bermuda grass, and mixed the Groplex 40 in there with it. And I tell you, I couldn't feel more confident on what I'm going to see over the next 2-3 weeks on how it's going to work.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
George, I'll turn the floor back over to you here. And when we wrap up, I do have a couple more questions from the audience, but I want to make sure you get a chance to wrap things up here.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple more slides with pictures. Curt, can you quickly take us through certainly what's going on here in this picture as it relates to stress and low sunlight and temperature changing, and then we'll walk through some of the pictures with the superintendent as well.
Yeah, and I guess I'd start off by making the point that if we were dealing with ideal growing conditions 90% of the time, 100% of the time, amino acids would be less important to use. But we're constantly dealing with different varying stresses, and this is a situation. It's a good example. What we have here is a picture of a practice green in North Florida, and this is a tip eagle green. It's overseeded with Poa trib, and you see the orange mark at the bottom of the picture that delineates two different treatments. And on the left-hand side is the liquid fertilizer program that the superintendent normally uses with competitive products, and then we coax the superintendent to use our program with our targeted amino products on the right side there. And our program had just a skosh more nitrogen in it, but not enough to increase growth, to change color differences. I mean, for the first 8-9 weeks of this trial, the growth, the color, the quality of the turf between the two treatments was exactly equal. I mean, there was no differences at all. But the interesting thing occurred with the weather change, and in late March, late to mid-March, the weather turned pretty nasty, cold, cloudy, very rainy for 8 or 10 days. And when the turf went through that period for a while, the turf on the left in the picture shows it took a downturn as far as color and quality. You can see the brown color there on the turf on the left, and on the right with our program, the turf viability, the color really hung in there through this nasty period. And these are the results that frankly we're excited to see and we're looking for, and we want to and we want to expose all of our customers to. So it's very, very, very exciting when we see this type of response, and a big part of that is the process that George is talking about in terms of uploading these osmolytes and antioxidants prior to the onset of stress. Okay. Can begin to wrap this baby up. I want to bring Brent on for one more time to talk about how amino acids can deliver a more rapid response in terms of stress and recovery. So real quick, Brent, if you can talk about, especially the first time that you used our aeration recovery program and the results you got out of that. Again, a low nitrogen program.
Yep, Sure. Yeah, so the first year we used the product, we did reduce all nitrogen, other sources out that first year, and going into aerification, I was a little bit nervous. We aerify in August, and still doing quite a bit of play then, and so they had me do a sort of a primer spray with the aminos on a Friday. We began aerification Sunday afternoon, and you could really tell that Sunday morning whenever we mowed, we were getting quite a bit of growth, and we were pretty regulated going into that. We aerified half the holes done Sunday night, finished up Monday early enough that we actually went back out with our second application of the aminos. And it was literally on Friday, the ATS rep checked in with me just to see how everything was going, and sarcastically said it. I was like, I wasn't happy with it because we're already healed in, and I basically had to aerify again. So I mean, the picture on the right, that probably was 10 days later, but it probably looked like that about 5 or 6 days later, and so it's just amazing how it healed in that quick with very little nitrogen.
Right, right. Yeah, these aren't pictures of your turf. These are actually pictures from a different instance, but just kind of an example to throw up there while you spoke. So, so really doing a lot of things for the turf from a stress standpoint during that recovery period, and again, helping with protein development, that nitrogen assimilation, converting into proteins is really, really important in that process. So, so the last thing that I want to mention here, and we've touched on it already a little bit, I'll let Keith weigh in it one more time, is yeah, we do see some really nice benefits when we tank mix certain chemistries with our amino acid products. A lot of that we see out of growth regulators, and we see some better performance out of systemic fungicides as well. And so, Keith, if you can just talk briefly about your experiences this spring, especially with your ryegrass and how it performed with the applications of Grow 40 and Trinexpec ethyl, please.
Sure. What our problem is that with overseeded Bermuda grass, the rate for the growth regulator is pretty much 2x what on ryegrass that you would put on Bermuda grass. And so our tournament being in early May, some years the Bermuda's jumping out, some years it's not. This past year, like I said earlier, the Bermuda grass is starting to wake up. So we really didn't want to go out and spray a real heavy rate of growth regulator because it would knock the Bermuda back. But we had to figure out something to do to get the ryegrass to shut down for tournament quality. And so what we found is when we sprayed the GrowPlex 40 at 55 ounces to the acre or 1.25 ounces per thousand, we were able to cut our growth regulator rates in half. So instead of spraying 22 ounces to the acre, the Primo, we were able to cut that down to 12 ounces to the acre, and we saw tremendous results. And I think as it moved through the plant so well, it shut things down, and it did not stop the Bermuda from waking up, and we had a successful transition while also regulating the ryegrass to have improved tournament conditions.
Thanks, Keith. Again, those are observations that we hear quite often from customers. George, can you explain a little bit why we might be seeing this occurrence with the tank mix between
Yeah, and this is kind of, I guess people want me sitting in the stand saying this is kind of an odd place to put this in, but really if you look at it, it's about getting these stomatal pores open up. And the way you do that is you fill the vacuoles in the guard cell. The guard cells, when the vacuoles are full, they'll flex open, which provides you the opportunity and entry point for not only CO2, but also for foliar nutrients, also for PGRs, for systemic pesticides, right? And when your vacuoles aren't open, then your stomatal pores begin to close. Your guard cells shrink and they close up. So for us, the benefits that we're seeing is we're getting these amino acids in there, and I think we always kind of put things in human being time, like it takes us X amount of time to walk a mile or to eat lunch or whatever, but metabolically things happen very quickly in a cell. And so when we're mixing these amino acids in with this PGR, with the systemic pesticide, or with your nutrients, what's happening is these amino acids are entering the plant at low molecular weight, entering the plant, going through the vascular system, and then they're metabolizing into these osmolytes, and you're seeing your seminal pores open in real time while that solution is sitting on the leaf. And Keith's real-world example of possibilities. In the future, certainly we can talk about what amino acids are doing as we pair them with nutrients. What amino acids are doing as we pair them with a phosphite ion. I mean, there's a lot more to discuss on this topic, but it all flows down to, can we fill these vacuoles, and then can we help it move through the vascular system, and certainly what is vascular mobile and what is not is a discussion for another day, but hopefully we can have that in another webinar in the future. So takeaways today, and then we can hopefully answer a few questions, and we'll look at a distributor map if you guys are excited about talking to somebody more about this. But really, we talked about 5 things, guys. We talked about nitrogen assimilation, chlorophyll production, carbon assimilation, production of other amino acids, and then increasing your stress resistance. And guys, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is maintaining your turf in stressful conditions, which is very often in what we're doing because of various reasons we listed at the beginning of the presentation. But we're also talking about maximizing the genetic potential of your turf. And these amino acids, and specifically certain amino acids at certain concentrations, can be a very powerful tool for anybody's program. Whether you're going to run a complete amino acid program or whether you're just going to throw amino acids in the tank when you're putting out PGRs or systemic pesticides, you will see benefits from doing that. And our job is to be able to continue to bring the science behind why. You won't hear from us nebulous statements about amino acids do neat things to the plant, and we're building some sort of generic protein structures in there. And we're going to come with you the science to tell you exactly what's going on and how it's going on, and that's what makes a great partnership. So if you guys, and we can switch into questions now. I'm going to throw this distributor map up there. We talked about having 2 brands. There are subtle differences between the 2, and there's distributors that carry certain ones depending on in the country. Again, if you're interested in what you've heard today and you want to take action, this is contact information for our distributors. Alternatively, this presentation will be made available to you. At the beginning of the presentation, you had Curt Geron's information there as well as my information, and you guys can feel free to reach out to either one of us to talk about this more. But Pat, questions from the group, other comments?
Yeah, we had a couple more good ones just real quickly. Keith and I'm losing my mind. And for the superintendents, are you looking at using any combination of these products going into fall dormancy? Brent, Keith?
Yes, we do. We've continued to use them here. Temperatures are still up for us here, so we continue to use them. We'll probably use them through October, and then we sort of get off of them.
Yes, same here. Probably a little bit deeper into the season. We're not overseeding this year, so it's going to be straight Bermuda grass. And we're looking forward to growing grass as long as Mother Nature will let us, and we'll use the amino acids. We'll obviously use some iron and some micronutrients and some magnesium. And as long as we can, the plant can produce chlorophyll and make carbohydrates and put them in reserves, we'll be glad to give it what it needs so that way it wakes up healthy next spring.
Okay. And then one quick question probably for George. Have you seen any reduction in summer-induced chlorosis on bluegrass? So we mostly talked about Benton Bermuda. How about bluegrass?
Yeah, absolutely. We do quite a bit of work with amino acids in the landscape sector as well. And we've seen some pretty dramatic color changes in really stressed out bluegrass also. Curt, do you have anything you want to add to that specifically about what you've seen in your backyard? And I mean, figurative backyard, not literal.
Yeah, you don't want to see my backyard. But yeah, we do see some impacts from with really any cool season turf. The aminos are building a lot of stress tolerance. They're increasing photosynthetic activity, and we see some very nice impacts. We have folks that they use them on lawn situations, blue, rye, and George, we've been through a lot of recovery situations and high stress situations with the lawn programs, and see some great results.
Absolutely. I mean, we had that. We had a lot of these amino acids go down up there in north central Ohio, where we had that terrible drought this year, and the color response was amazing. So yeah, absolutely. That's the short answer.
Terrific. That covers most of it. Go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of folks, in terms of using products in the fall, are combining the amino acids, our Grow 40, say, with a potassium program. Again, you're increasing osmolytes from an inorganic perspective, with your potassium, and an organic perspective with the amino acid package. And so that's my 2 cents there.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for doing a great job today, and our audience for asking some really good questions. I grabbed a few more questions that I'll forward to the folks at ENP that they can answer directly for you. And like we said earlier, we will be sharing all of the information, including a copy of the entire webinar for your perusal, but also if you want to share it with other people, you should receive that within about a week or so. But again, any last thoughts, George? You did a great job, and we almost stayed on time, but any last thoughts to share today for our attendees?
Yeah, I want to thank you, Pat, for the opportunity. You and your team have done a great job. I want to thank everyone for being on the presentation today. We've got a lot more interesting stuff to talk about from here, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do this again in the near future.
That sounds great. Well, thanks to all of you, and Keith, Brent, we'll hopefully see both of you soon. Brent, I may see you tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that. And Keith, I might be forced to come down and visit you next August and see what's going on down there. So with that, thank you very much to all of you for attending. And as always, we look forward to hearing any feedback you have about our webinars. Have a great day, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.